Welcome back to the Tundra, episode 25, presented by Nicolet Law. He's John Kuhn, Packers legend. I'm Matt Schneidman of The Athletic. If it looks like my background is any different, that's because it is. I'm live to tape from Indianapolis, Indiana, at the convention center where the NFL Combine is being held. I'm here for the Combine. We talked to Brian Gutekunst, local reporters, for about 40 minutes in a sit-down today, and then he took the podium. There's a lot to get to. A lot of little tidbits we can pick apart. And John, you know, you've been around Gutey enough. He doesn't give you anything outright, but it is kind of fun to read between the lines of maybe some things that he says and try and decipher what he means based on one word or another word. And then we'll get to some listener questions later in the show. But where I want to start, John, is I think the most newsworthy thing that came out of today is what Brian Gutekunst said about Rich Bisaccia. We talked to Gutey for about 40 minutes 3 weeks ago. Nothing new has happened. A little bit new has happened. Matt LaFleur is not here. So really the only new thing we had to ask him about was Rich Bisaccia stepping down as special teams coordinator, which we haven't talked about on here yet. Brian Gutekunst said today, when I asked him off the top, was this something you saw coming? He said, we weren't expecting this at all. He said it caught them by surprise. He said Rich wanted to explore other opportunities. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, when the timing of Rich stepping down was apparent, it was clear Rich made this decision, and he definitely took a lot of thought. It was a process for Rich Bisaccia. I believe he went down to Florida and really thought about this deeply, probably with his family in mind and other opportunities in mind. But Rich Bisaccia stepping down, at the time he stepped down, really kind of fast-forwarded a process that didn't need to be fast-forwarded had this been several weeks ago. Now, Matt LaFleur has finished interviewing several candidates, and I'm sure you got the names of all of those candidates right off the top of your head there, Matt, but has finished interviewing some candidates here recently, and he'll have to pick a new special teams coordinator along with the new assistant special teams coordinator because Brian Storer took that head special teams coordinator job in Cleveland. So right when Matt LaFleur starts really dialing in his staff offensively and defensively because of those pieces that leave, now he's left with a hole on the special team side that he has to fill as well. Yeah,
and Gutey tried to spin it, and I respect him for trying to do this, but he was basically asked, doesn't the timing of this kind of put you guys at a disadvantage because the musical chairs of special teams coordinators already is finished? You know, I think Bill Huber did a story on it.
If you're going to go for a big name, if you're going to go for an established name, but there are many great coaches out there in the National Football League, in the college ranks, guys that are looking to get that shot. And if you wanted another Rich Bisaccia type, another guy coming in with the pedigree that Rich came in with several years ago, you're not getting that, but you will have to dive deep. And there are many good candidates out there, and trying to find that one that can grow into the next great special teams coordinator, that's the one you're trying to pick.
Sounds like there's a woodpecker here next to me. That's nice. I think what I was saying is Gutey tried to spin it as basically, I want to look at it as glass half full. We don't have to compete against anybody for any candidates that are left because we're the only team without a special teams coordinator. So I respect the spin zone there. Huber had a couple names that they interviewed. Devin Fitzsimmons, who's the Seahawks assistant special teams coach. Cam Accord, who's the Giants assistant special teams coach. Former Raiders special teams coordinator Tom McMahon, who's also Pat McAfee's special teams coach in Indy. Sam Sewell, Arizona Cardinals assistant special teams coach. And then Kyle Wilber, who played for Bisaccia in Dallas and with the Raiders, coached under him in Green Bay, and was just a special teams assistant with the Saints this past season. So there are a couple names, and I think that's why Matt LaFleur, in part, didn't come to the Combine this week. He hasn't come in recent years, but he's talking to special teams coaches, interviewing them back in Green Bay. So that was kind of the main thing to come out of today, why that happened. For transparency's sake, because one of the replies I got on Twitter today was, how about you guys do real journalism and find out why Bisaccia stepped down? I texted him. I said, you have anything more to add? If you want to talk, I'm all ears. He didn't respond. I don't know what else you want me to do. Number two, Gutey is never going to outright come out, especially at this time of the year, and say, we're cutting this guy or we're extending this guy. But he might drop a little hint here or there with regards to the futures of some guys. So we're going to run through a couple quickly. Josh Jacobs. I never really thought that his future was much in question, but some fans and bloggers have thrown his name out there. He does have a lot of mileage. They could get out of his contract. There is an injury history there. But I asked Brian Gutekunst straight up today if Josh Jacobs would be the Packers' feature back next year. And Brian Gutekunst said, yeah, absolutely. So Josh Jacobs is not going anywhere.
You know who I love when I hear this about running backs? Mileage, right? It's why the running back position kind of got devalued for a while as far as salaries go, and wide receiver contracts got exponentially greater. You know who has a ton of mileage to them? Derrick Henry. You know who I saw run for 200 some odd yards against us this year? Derrick Henry. I'm not concerned with mileage. I'm concerned.
He's a
about
Hall
the
of
player.
Famer. He's a Hall of Famer, though. That's different.
Josh Jacobs' career is just in the middle right now.
Great running back. I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer.
You never know where he could end up.
Okay.
But did lead the league in rushing a few years ago and could very easily lead the league in rushing again next year if they work on the offensive line, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment.
We will. Rashan Gary's another one. Obviously, he's probably the biggest question mark with regards to, is he going to be on the team next year? Is he not? Well, first, with Jacobs, what I want to touch on, I think this is worth mentioning. People brought up, and it popped into my head too, January, or I think it was February 1st, 2024, Brian Gutekunst is asked at his season-ending press conference after they lose to the Niners in the divisional round, do you expect Aaron Jones to be back? And he said, absolutely. He also used the word absolutely today when talking about Josh Jacobs, but there are differences there. And it's a very small one, but I think when we're trying to read between the lines, we have to get very granular here. With Aaron Jones, he said he absolutely expected him to be back. There's an expectation. It's not a statement of fact. With Josh Jacobs, it was a statement of fact that he will be the team's running back next year, number one running back. So when people say, oh, he said that about Aaron Jones, slightly different. And I think that matters. Rashan Gary.
Real quick, just on that note, Guti has mentioned that before he expects them to be back. And a lot of that has to do with players that still have years left on their contract, right? And I believe at his exit press conference, he did mention that about Rashan Gary. He did mention that about Keyshawn Nixon, other players on the Packers roster that do have years left. So he said the same thing about them. But I agree with you. The endorsement of Josh Jacobs being the starter, that's somewhat different.
Yeah, and that's kind of the company line for Guti is he's under contract. I expect him back. We know that's not true for everybody because he expects him back if there's nothing done to that contract. Now he could void the contract, or what I mean is release a guy. Rashan Gary, here's what he said about him today. He's on our roster, and I expect him to play at that level or higher if he's back next year. If. He used the word if, and we'll see how that goes. He used the word if. Now, Rashan Gary, he has drawn praise from Guti for his production, but he was absent second half of the year. I think there's a chance Rashan Gary is back, but he absolutely cannot be back at his current price. His cap number of $28 million is the second highest cap number on the team behind Jordan Love. If Rashan Gary's willing to take a pay cut, sure, bring him back. But if he's not willing to take a pay cut, you got to let him go.
Yeah, and I think this is where Guti and Russ Ball, they get an opportunity to work their magic. And I've seen players before have down years, and Rashan didn't have a down year. He had a down second half of the year last year. And at that contract price, you're absolutely right. It would be malpractice to just bring him back without having to alter the contract somewhat. And I've seen players bounce back from a situation like this to have really good seasons. Rashan Gary, if he comes back, will have that opportunity.
A very interesting part of today was Ellie French from Fox 11, another Sinclair property, shout out Sinclair, asked Brian Gutekunst where he thinks competition is needed the most on the roster. And I thought to myself as the question is being asked, it's a completely fair question, good question, but I thought Guti never takes the bait with these kinds of questions. He's just going to say, I think competition's needed at every spot. He actually answered it. He said, I would say the secondary and inside linebacker is where we need competition the most. And my first thought was, okay, secondary. You don't need competition at safety because you have McKinney, Williams, and Bullard. So it has to be cornerback. And I would imagine he's referencing competition that's needed perhaps from an early draft pick or a free agent signing, not from Nate Hobbs and Carrington Valentine battling out for that number 2 corner spot. So I thought that was notable. And here's another one I want to get your take on, John. Inside linebacker. If they were planning on bringing Quay Walker back and paying him the large amount that he's sure to get on the open market from whatever team, there's competition. If Quay Walker comes back, it's Cooper, Quay, McDuffie, and Hopper. There's no competition there. The only reason there would be competition is if Quay Walker does not come back. So my conclusion, reading between the lines, is that they are not going to re-sign Quay Walker. Could I be wrong? Sure, but that was my takeaway.
Yeah, as you start looking at some of the Packers to-be free agents here in the coming weeks, you talk about Rasheed Walker and how teams are already in kind of all of what he could bring to their team as a starting left tackle. I heard Jeff Hafley say some comments about Quay Walker here just this past week. You got Romeo Doubs on the market. I mean, I don't see a situation where really a free agent comes back unless it's J.J. Enagbare or Sean Ryan. I think those are two guys that definitely could come back and add production to this Packers team while not being one of the high-priced free agents that we see some of the other Packers free agents to be, Malik Willis included.
I totally agree, and we're going to do a full free agency preview episode here in the coming weeks and really dive into each of those guys. But it's something that Gutey talked about today, and I just want to get to this quickly before we break here, is the allure of compensatory picks, especially this year. And for people who don't know what a compensatory pick is, I'm not trying to mansplain this. It's basically a draft pick you get that can be as high as a 3rd-round pick in the following year's draft. So it wouldn't be for 2026, based on the size of the contract that your own free agents sign elsewhere. Now, if you sign your own free agents from other teams, there's a formula that can cancel out certain guys. So if the Packers basically let Rasheed Walker, Romeo Doubs, Quay Walker, Malik Willis walk, but then they sign 4 big-time free agents, they cancel out. But I don't think they're going to be big players in signing free agents. Brian Gutekunst said today he thinks his current roster can win a Super Bowl as it is. So basically what that means is Rasheed Walker is going to get a bag. Malik Willis is going to get a bag. Romeo Doubs and Quay Walker are going to get bags. The Packers might get as many as 2 third-round picks in the 2027 draft and like a 4th or a 5th or something around there in addition to those, because of the size of contracts the Walkers, Willis, and Doubs are going to sign elsewhere. And Gutey today was talking about how those forecasts of the comp picks they might get plays into their decision to pay their own guys. And what he said, and I get this, is we'll never put comp picks ahead of re-signing guys that we think can help us win now. He said, we're trying to win a Super Bowl right now. We're never going to bypass signing a guy for a price that we think is reasonable, that we think can help us win now, because we think we can get a comp pick in next year's draft. That's not going to help us win now. So I get that. But I don't think Rasheed Walker, Malik Willis, Romeo Doubs, or Quay Walker, especially at the prices they'll go for, are worth spending on now when you consider the draft compensation they would get in return, even if it is for 2027.
I could have told you that before you started bringing up the comp picks. Just the money and where the Packers roster is right now, draft and develop, they are fully in that mode.
All right. After the break, we got a couple more things to touch on from Brian Gutekunst near hour with all kinds of reporters today. He had some thoughts on Lucas Van Ness and potentially picking up that 5th-year option. A lot of talk about the offensive line. Where does he think Anthony Belton's best position long-term is? We'll touch on that and plenty more. You're listening to The Tundra.
This episode of the Tundra podcast is brought to you by Nicolet Law. Unlike football, life doesn't have an off season. You get up, you work, you take care of yourself and your family. When an injury happens, it doesn't just disrupt that routine. It can take over your entire life. The daily expectations of life do not stop, and now you're dealing with medical bills, insurance headaches, and a whole lot more. Nicolet Law. They've played a key role in thousands of injury recovery stories. Their attorneys fight insurance companies, investigate claims, and work to understand the full impact of every single injury. If you've been injured, you shouldn't be expected to manage your claim on top of everything else. So call 1-855-NICOLET or go to nicoletlaw.com.
Welcome back to the Tundra, presented by Nicolet Law. A couple more things I want to get to, John, from Brian Gutekunst's lengthy session with us today. Now is the time of year where front offices have to start weighing whether to exercise the fifth-year option for their 2023 first-round picks. Essentially what that means is, are they going to guarantee Lucas Van Ness's salary in 2027? Not 2026, 2027. Now, Van Ness has flashed in spurts, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on him. But Brian Gutekunst, when I asked him today, does he need to see Lucas Van Ness be healthy for an extended stretch of time before making a financial commitment to him that the fifth-year option would require? He said, and I quote, "Not necessarily, but I would have liked to get those games back that he missed this past year because he was playing at such a high level for us." He said, "It's always tough to get back to that level when you have that pause in the season. We feel really good about him, where he's headed, what he's done for us so far, and what he'll do for us in the future." And then there was a follow-up question about, well, would you be comfortable giving him all that money if you haven't seen what you need to see? And Guti basically said that the fifth-year option is more so a projection about what they expect from a player in the future as opposed to what they've already done. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, fifth-year options and franchise tags are not something that they throw around a whole lot in Green Bay. They find a way to go about their business, extending their players and seeing what they need to see within the first 3.5 years of them being on the team. And Guti has an advantage of having a little bit of time yet with Lucas Van Ness, and I agree with him when he says Lucas had jumped off with a start last year before he got injured against Washington, I think it was, or was it Cleveland? One of those
Cincinnati.
two teams, Cincinnati. They were all about the same last year. But before he got injured,
well, not really, because Cleveland beat the Packers last year.
Okay, fair enough. But he was popping off the film, and he was popping on game day on the field, and you were really starting to feel, okay, this is Lucas Van Ness's time. He might even turn into the opposite of Micah Parsons on the field, and it was really exciting having all those guys being able to rotate at the rush position and be able to get after a quarterback. But now you have a question mark with Rashan Gary. You got a question mark with J.J. Enagbare. Will he even be back because he's a free agent? And potentially Lucas Van Ness, if you don't keep him on that fifth-year option next year, he could be a free agent after this year as well. So all of a sudden, that position that looked like it was really deep at the beginning of the season got a lot shorter in a very quick time.
According to Over the Cap, if the Packers were to exercise Lucas Van Ness's fifth-year option, he would qualify for the basic part of that. And what I mean by that is there are 4 categories for 2023 first-round picks. There's basic, there's play time, which means you have to play a certain amount of time, 1 Pro Bowl and more than 1 Pro Bowl. Each of those 4 categories means your fifth-year option guaranteed price would be a different price. And if you make more than 1 Pro Bowl, it goes up. For example, Devin Witherspoon, if the Seahawks exercise his fifth-year option, he's guaranteed about $21.4 million for 2027. Jalen Carter, 1 Pro Bowl, $21.6 million. For Van Ness, he's the lowest end of that, the basic. He hasn't qualified for any of that stuff. He would be $15.4 million guaranteed in 2027 if the Packers were to exercise his option. And you bring up a good point about the edge position. Like, we're always so focused on the here and now about, okay, here's who they have this year. But it like for cornerback, for example, okay, they have Nate Hobbs, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, but Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine are both going into contract years. It's a general manager's job to think in the future and not just the now. So, sure, right now, they have Micah Parsons, they have Barron Sorrell, Colin Oliver, Van Ness, and Enagbare, but like looking out into the future is, what kind of deal is Enagbare going to sign? Is Van Ness going to be under contract long-term? Is Gary going to be here? So there's a lot of planning into the future that goes into these decisions. Guti did say today that he thinks Barron Sorrell is going to be a major part of the edge rusher core group next year.
And that's exciting, right?
Yeah.
You need the young guys that didn't get a whole lot of playing time this year to step up where there could potentially be voids next year. I think specifically as it pertains to Van Ness, You do, or you are afforded a little bit of a luxury in that he's at the basic price because he hasn't been out on the field much and he hasn't made a Pro Bowl. But you also have to speculate, is it worth the risk? Do you see still that high-end talent in him, or that high-end projection that you can give him the fifth year at that price tag without seeing it yet?
And what Gutey said today is that's kind of what they did with Devonta Wyatt. Because what Gutey said today, I wouldn't say he threw the coaching staff under the bus, but he said Devonta Wyatt didn't play as much as he should have when he was coming up. You know, we gave him that fifth-year option guarantee kind of as a projection of what he was going to do. And he was great when he was healthy this past season. He just got hurt. On that topic with edge rushers and Micah Parsons, I asked Gutey today if Micah Parsons and his desire to play week one makes the Packers be like, dude, relax. Like, we can't risk you having a setback in this recovery. And a funny tidbit, Brian Gutekunst said Micah Parsons has a nickname for him. He's nicknamed his own general manager the No Man, basically saying Gutey is the one to tell Micah, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, looking out for his health. But he said on a serious note that Micah and Tucker Kraft are both doing well in their ACL rehabs. The No Man. Brian Gutekunst is the No Man.
Yeah, and I'm sure both those guys are trying to push the boundaries on what they're allowed to do and how far they can progress.
They're both psychos.
And as quick as they can progress. But they're psychos in a good way.
Yes.
They are psychos because they're addicted to trying to improve their bodies and get back to where they want to be. I mean, watching both of them, they both play through a plethora of different injuries throughout their early careers already. So for them to be sore and rehabbing, that's just normal life for them. They're accustomed to this. But it's funny you mentioned Gutey as being no man, because I remember having a conversation with Gutey about what it was like to take over as GM. And he said, when I sat on the other side of the table from Ted Thompson, I was never really understanding why he was so afraid of players getting hurt at practice. and he didn't want them to practice so many hours, and he wanted to bubble wrap everybody and save them to Sunday. And he said, it wasn't until I sat in that chair behind the desk and I started looking out in the other direction that I realized, man, I need these guys. These are my guys that are going to get me to a Super Bowl. I need to take care of them at all costs. So I thought that was funny. But a guy that's been in the organization and been very close to the situation for 2 decades, it takes him being the actual general manager before he starts realizing what it's like to say no to players.
He said he hasn't talked to Micah in a couple weeks, but he did say Micah is a great communicator and doing well in his rehab. And the good part about Micah Parsons is he loves social media. So he'll post videos of his progress so we can kind of keep tabs on him even when it's the off season. All right, let's talk O-line. As the official O-line podcast of the Green Bay Packers, since we've had David Bakhtiari and TJ Lang on the show, 2 great Packers offensive linemen, the Packers offensive line is trying to get back to the days of when Dave and TJ were on the offensive line, right? I think the starting 5 for next year is pretty set in stone. Jordan Morgan, Aaron Banks, I would imagine they re-signed Sean Ryan, Anthony Belton, and Zach Tom. They need depth. Gutey was asked today what he thinks the strength of this draft is, and he said the depth of the offensive linemen. And that's useful for a team that, even though they don't have a first-round pick, has a pick in every round after that. 2 big topics of discussion today with Gutey were Jordan Morgan and Anthony Belton. I asked him where he thinks Anthony Belton's best position long-term is. He said right guard, at least for right now. He wants Anthony Belton to get settled in at right guard, even though he was a college left tackle. With Jordan Morgan, Gutey again reiterated that he thinks Jordan Morgan played well enough last preseason to start at left tackle for the Packers. Now, Gutey's not going to say this publicly. I wish he would. It was neck and neck with Rashid and Jordan, and we just needed Rashid to play and play well to get the comp pick. That's probably the truth. But I do think, John, and you know O-line play better than me, that they really do like Jordan Morgan's prospects as their starting left tackle next year.
Yeah, I think they like his prospects at left tackle, and I think if they had started him this year at left tackle instead of Rasheed Walker, it would have been as a prospect type, right? I don't think even though he played well in the preseason there, I don't think he had enough work or enough time to be able to feel comfortable going into the season as you were comfortable with Rasheed Walker at the left tackle position. And there was needs at other spots across the offensive line that they tried to get Jordan Morgan reps and to get him assimilated at. Now, where they're at on the offensive line right now is Yeah, he's the incumbent. He's going right there to left tackle, and now it's time for him to show that prospect status that they had pegged for him throughout training camp and when they drafted him 2 years ago. So he's got clear advantage of being the starting left tackle, Aaron Banks left guard. Like you said, Sean Ryan, he's got to be re-signed yet. He still has to be re-signed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting. You didn't name Elgton Jenkins. Where do you see him fall in this whole dynamic of the offensive line?
Look, Elgton was a great draft pick. He was a resounding success in Green Bay. 2-time Pro Bowler at left guard. The decision to move him to center didn't work out. Elgton said himself that he was playing like shit to start last season. He got better at center, but he's 30 years old, coming off a major leg injury, and they can free up $20 million in cap space by cutting him. It's a no-brainer decision. I would be even more surprised if Elgton Jenkins is on the team next year than if Rashan Gary is on the team. I think you're always trying to get younger while maintaining the level of talent you have at that position. And here's what Gutey said about Sean Ryan on that topic today when we're talking centers. He said, I thought he got better each game. It was about game 3 or 4 of starting at center. He was playing at a very high level. He's just a really physical, strong guy. With Belton coming to right guard and Ryan playing center, our ability to move people inside got better as the year went on. And look, is the best decision maybe to put Elgton Jenkins back at left guard? Maybe. But Gutey's not cutting Aaron Banks yet. He's not going to admit that he made a mistake if he thinks that he does. So I would be very surprised if Elgton Jenkins is on the team. But they do need to get a lot better depth-wise because past that starting 5 that I mentioned, who do they have? Are they going to bring Darian Kennard back? Jacob Monk, Lasita Smith? There are multiple offensive line injuries every year with this team. And just putting it matter-of-factly, I'm not confident in anybody past that starting 5 stepping in to play and protect my top 5 caliber quarterback if I'm Brian Gutekunst. And when Jordan Love has time, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. When he's under siege, second half against the Broncos, second half of the playoff game, completely different. They need better depth on the offensive line because injuries are bound to happen.
Yeah, I'd love to see Elgton Jenkins back on this football team, even if it is just to compete with Aaron Banks or Sean Ryan at center, and we don't even know if Sean Ryan's going to be back, right? But I'd love to see that scenario because Elgton he's the vocal leader of the offensive line room. He's the established veteran in that room along with Zach Tom, so it always helps to have that guy. But you're preaching a lot of stuff that makes sense there, and it could very well be likely that we're done seeing Elgton Jenkins in the green and gold, which to me bums me out because I thought he was a spectacular offensive lineman. He played many different positions at a high level for the team. Offensive line still a very big work in progress here in the offseason, and then it will be going into training camp.
And this is the last thing I want to add here before we take another break. All these discussions we're having about Devonta Wyatt and Zach Tom and Micah Parsons, Tucker Kraft, God bless them in their recoveries and knock on wood. I know I'm an objective reporter, but I never wish for guys to get hurt or have setbacks. But all those guys have months-long recoveries ahead of them this offseason. We're just sharpieing in Zach Tom, and Micah Parsons will be back week 3, and Tucker Kraft will be back. These are complicated recoveries and rehabs of major injuries, months long.
That we've seen complications with stars in the past.
We've also seen stars in the past come back even better from these. So that's very possible too. But I do want to, and maybe this is a caveat for myself more than anybody, there's a lot that goes into these rehabs. So everything has to go well because guess what? Zach Tom's rehabbing for 6 months after he had surgery for a partially torn patellar tendon that he couldn't return from after the Denver game. We're just penciling him in at right tackle. He's their best offensive lineman. If there's a setback, then what do they do? So you got to think about all those things. All right, we're going to get to some listener questions, talk about some other things around the league. The tush push is back in conversation, but not for the same reasons it was last year, John Kuhn. We'll touch on that and a bunch more to close out this Combine edition. You're listening to The Tundra. Welcome back to The Tundra. This segment, John, is brought to you by Potawatomi Sportsbook.
And for all our sports bettors out there, whether you're new to the game or you can knock out a 16-leg parlay with the best of them, the premier sports book you want is smack dab in the middle of Milwaukee, and that is the Potawatomi Sportsbook. Not only are there over 90 different sports betting kiosks, there's an all-star of fine dining, first-class drinks, and a giant video wall and more. It's nothing short of awesome. Potawatomi Sportsbook, bet above the rest.
Now, John, if you look at Potawatomi Sportsbook, and might I add, I believe it's April 7th, don't quote me on that, you and I will be doing a show from Potawatomi in their state-of-the-art studio that we both have done stuff from before. I'm looking at the Potawatomi odds right now. The Packers are currently 14-1 to win the Super Bowl. That is tied with the Philadelphia Eagles for the 5th best odds to win next year's Super Bowl. Kind of goes in line with what Brian Gutekunst said today at the Combine of, I think we can win the Super Bowl with the roster we have right now. Do you agree with him?
I do. I agree with him, and I agree with the odds makers there for the sportsbook down at Potawatomi, because if you look at what the Packers were able to achieve last year for a vast majority of the season before a plethora of different injuries, took them down a peg towards the end of the season. They were right there. They were in the 2 seed heading into, week 13, something to that nature. They were right where they needed to be before the injury bug really plagued them down the stretch. And listen, the reason they're not number 1 or 2 or 3 is because there are a lot of question marks to those injured players from last year coming back and some of the roster turnover. But every team's going to have roster turnover. And I think if you look at the playoffs last year and you start saying, oh, well, who could the Packers compete with in the NFC? I feel like they could compete with any one of those teams in the NFC, even though Seattle, they were on one in the playoffs. That would have been a tough out last year. Can they keep it up this year?
I mean, if the Packers had held on to that lead in Chicago, they would have gone to Seattle the next week, and that would have been interesting. Guti said midway through the Chicago game, he thought they were going to beat Seattle. I was like, all right, fair enough. Let's get to some listener questions here. From @NotionsOfNick on Twitter. What positions does Guti see as the strengths of this draft class? I mentioned earlier he was asked that and kind of said the depth of the offensive line. Guti did say today that we don't have a first-round pick right now, but that doesn't mean we won't have a first-round pick. It's unrealistic, and he acknowledged that they'll trade up, into at least the meat of the first round. The back end of the first round is more realistic, but the Packers are not in a position realistically to give up the draft capital and potentially players that it would take to move up into the first round. Although Guti did say they have already met at the Combine with guys projected to go in the first round, just because that's their due diligence process.
Yeah, to even jump up into the back end of the first round with the back end of the second round pick that they do have. They have charts and boards on what each one of these draft picks are measured at. It would take a massive haul to just move up to the back end of the first round from where they're positioned in the second round. I'd be surprised if they draft in the first round this year.
Another question from Nick. We already answered this. I put out this call for questions early today. Was there any indication Bisaccia would step down, or were they blindsided by it? The latter. They seemed like they were blindsided by it. All right.
And here's kind of the deal on that, Matt. Like, I know there was, some talk of Rich Bisaccia potentially stepping down last year, and that this was something that was maybe on the radar, but many people didn't consider it to be real or true happening this year, especially because of the timing that had passed. Had this happened a few days after the season, or maybe even a week or two after the season, I don't think it would have caught anybody by surprise, but I think it was the timing of it that really caught Brian Gutekunst and the rest of 1265 by surprise.
From @SchultzJJ, does Guti see a third-string running back like he likes in round 2? What if a young quarterback drops in round 1? Does he think he has the ammo to move up and take him? Is he tempted to release Hobbs so he can re-sign him to a way over-the-market contract? I just realized after I finished reading those that all of those are sarcastic questions.
Super sarcastic.
I just realized that. Schultz JJ, appreciate it. From Nate Bertschinger, if Quay isn't re-signed, are the Packers going to focus on linebacker in the draft/free agency, or are we moving forward with what we currently have? Good question. Well, I think what I mentioned earlier is that Guti identified inside linebacker as a spot where he needs more competition at. And like I said, I took that to mean that Quay Walker won't be back. So that would leave, let's see, Tyron Hopper, Isaiah McDuffie, Edgerrin Cooper. I don't know if you're drafting an off-ball linebacker on day 2 if you don't have a first-round pick. I would put O-line, corner, defensive end as, and probably some other positions as higher needs on that list. But I do think they would add to that position. I don't think you can go into 2026 just with what? Why are you shaking your finger at me?
Because Guti will remind you that they don't draft specifically off of need.
Right, it's best player available.
Best player available.
I know that, but
and
you also have to consider
monster, if there's a monster like Edgerrin Cooper was a monster in a draft, you might consider taking him to put him beside Edgerrin Cooper.
Yeah, I get that, but I think I think need factors into it. Because if you're picking in round 2 at number 52 and the best player available is a quarterback, you're not taking a quarterback. Need factors into it as well.
If I remember correctly, both Marshawn Lloyd and Edgerrin Cooper in their draft class were ranked very high. And there was another running back or 2 taken off the board and another linebacker or 2 taken off the board. So they could have very well been Gutey's number 1 running back and number 1 linebacker on their boards, and who knows where it stacked up on their big board, but on their boards, and saw a couple other guys go off of that position already and saw that the value that they had for them was much higher than where they were drafting in that spot.
Yeah. Look, I think Brian Gutekunst has shown over the years a penchant for drafting best player available. And you might think, okay, well, why do we need, Jordan Morgan in round 1 if he's not going to start right away? Or why do we need, I'm trying to think of who else they might have drafted that wasn't like an immediate need. There are probably other instances that I don't have off the top of my head, but sure. Could they take an off-ball linebacker on day 2? It would cause an uproar among the fan base, but if it's best player available and they don't bring back Quay Walker, I could see it. It's perfectly reasonable. One more question. Another one from Notions of Nick. This is a good question. Knowing the Packers are in a Super Bowl window, how does his approach to the draft change from years past? I wouldn't say it changes because they were in a Super Bowl window last year as well, I think. And John, this is probably a better question for you because you've been around this organization for a long time. The Packers are more of a draft and develop organization. But this is my own question. How do you combine being a draft and develop organization, and it's worked, with the urgency of trying to win now?
Well, you sign or you make a trade for a guy named Micah Parsons right before the season. That's how you balance that.
Oh, not Micah freaking Parsons? What happened to you, John Kuhn?
Okay, so Micah freaking Parsons, and that's how you do it. He took a swing last year, and that's why the Packers roster is and was where it was last year during the season, and where it is right now with the odds down at Potawatomi that you just said. There's a reason why the roster has the ability to make a Super Bowl run. But now that you are in this window, I mean, we talked about not just this year, but next year and the following year, how lean this roster could potentially get off of people that are going into free agency. You are always looking at filling in those gaps and taking your time to be able to develop those players so that when those voids do come, they can slide in there. You can get the comp picks for the guys who are leaving, going elsewhere, and these other guys are ready to step in without losing a step on your offense or your defense. And that's what you have to try and do when you're in a Super Bowl window while still keeping your dynamic core, which is Christian Watson, Josh Jacobs, Jordan Love, Jaden Reed, and did I say Micah Parsons yet?
Kraft.
Right? Edgerrin Cooper, Tucker Kraft, Xavier McKinney. When you have those guys there, everybody else are corollary pieces that need to contribute while they're proving themselves. And if they prove themselves to be up to that snuff, then you re-sign them and keep them. If not, you're always drafting the next group of guys to come in and be those corollary pieces. That's what draft and develop is truly about.
Speaking of drafting, what hasn't been drafted this offseason is a proposal to ban the tush push. Now, we all know that last offseason, the Packers were at the center of that. The Packers were the team who proposed a tush push ban. It's common knowledge now that the Packers didn't do that themselves. It was the league asking the Packers to be the guinea pigs for it. So Guti was kind of sarcastically asked by Rob Domofsky today, Has anyone asked you to propose a ban for the tush push yet? And Guti kind of laughed and said not yet. But Rich McKay, I believe, said this week that there aren't going to be any significant rule changes, especially not the tush push. So it seems like a year ago we thought, okay, even if it's here this year, it got close to being banned, it'll be banned next year. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
Yeah, and it's just ironic that the Philadelphia Eagles lose a couple offensive linemen last year. They're maybe not as good at the tush push as they once were. They didn't make it to a Super Bowl. They didn't win a Super Bowl using the tush push 5 times in the Super Bowl. And here the NFL is saying, you know what? Maybe we'll just try and combat it with trying to strip Jalen Hurts when he rushes with the football on the tush push. So I never had a problem, never once, with the tush push. And I'm glad to see that the Packers aren't going to be the league's guinea pigs or face of the tush push banning in 2026.
And John, I know you wanted to talk about adding flags to replay.
Well,
that's an interesting one too.
This comes as the NFL is having discussions with the referees union. So I don't know what the letters are to make that whole thing, but they have a union as well, and they're working on negotiations on an extension. I believe it goes through this year. Their current CBA goes through this year. But this is an instance where the NFL, not just for replays that you can throw flags on non-football plays, meaning a personal foul, an unnecessary roughness, something that happens after the play, but this is looking at having a centralized kind of automated referee station in New York that could do the job of referees in lieu of them on the field. I think we're going down a path that's a little weird,
the murky
a little
waters,
ambiguous, and I don't know if we want to go there, but this is what the NFL is proposing right now, and it just happens to be during the current CBA negotiations that the league is having with the current referees. They've been having this negotiation for over a year and a half with little to no breakthroughs. This could get weird again. We might see replacement refs again in 2027.
Oof. Fail Mary? Again?
Yeah, I've remembered it. I would hate that.
All right. We appreciate everyone for listening. Nice productive day here in Indianapolis. Free agency in a couple weeks. The NFL calendar 2026 is raring to go. It's already underway. And the owners' meetings after that we'll hear from Matt LaFleur and Jonathan Gannon. We're right back into it, John Kuhn.
You going to go get some cocktail sauce with some horseradish and some shrimp down there at St. Elmo's?
No, this isn't my first time to Indianapolis, so I'm not doing those touristy things. I am going to the Pacers 76ers game tonight with a couple of friends who live in Indy who used to work in Green Bay, so that's what I'm going to go do. But before I do that, I need everybody to do us a favor. Toss us a follow on Instagram and on Twitter at the Tundra GB. Subscribe to our YouTube. You know, this show isn't going anywhere. We're year-round. We'll be here. We appreciate everybody for listening.